If there are any extras in your row, you guys can just pass them towards the back because they might be a little short back there. Okay, so today we are going to talk about how to be a reflective practitioner. What do you think I mean by reflective practitioner? Anyone have any ideas? What does it mean to be reflective? Anyone? To evaluate. What else? To be reflective. What does that mean? Yes, thank you.
To try and learn from the things that you've evaluated.
Okay, so to try and learn from them. So you've evaluated things, you've tried to learn from them. Anything else anyone wants to add to that? Those are good examples. So what is a practitioner then? Anyone? Practitioner, what is that? What does it sound like it is? If you've never heard the term before. Yeah?
Someone who practices something?
Yeah, so you guys are practitioners in what? What are the majority of you majoring in? Engineering. Okay, good. Okay, so you are reflective practitioners in engineering, right? And if you're in a different discipline, then you're insert that discipline, right? So today we're going to talk about this process of, evaluating and learning from the lessons that you may have experienced as you're going through your practice as an engineer with your community partner. All right, so first things first, I want you to just take out a scrap piece of paper and answer this question. Scrap piece of paper, just quickly jot down. You can do it in your phone too, I don't care. Just some way to jot down some ideas. Do we have any extra handouts? Or are we short some today? So just jot down some quick responses to that question. Okay, now take a few, let's say a minute, and talk to someone next to you and tell them what you said in response to this. You should hear talking in this room. Some noise.
Okay.
I think we might be short. I don't see any extras back there, so I'll have to email it to you guys. I don't know. I had 40 copies, so I don't know what. Well, you can share. All right, who wants to share what they talked about? One group, just tell me quickly what you talked about. What is a lesson you learned in the last 6 weeks? Semester's kind of winding down, something you learned. Oh, come on, you guys were just talking. Yes, thank you.
Time management and the emotional expense of certain things like weather and stuff like that, taking into account those things.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have a time management issue that they wrote down about? Yeah, a few of you? Okay, all right. What were you going to share?
I
to say that I learned that, at least for me, going to bed early is the most effective way to become a good student, because it, one, allows you to actually wake up for your classes, but two,
Yeah.
you get more sleep, so whenever you go to do whatever it is that you have to do throughout the day, you feel more prepared. Because when you're tired, it's kind of hard
Yes.
to focus on what you're doing.
That is very, very true. As someone who has a new baby and does not sleep at all at night, I will say that is incredibly important to get sleep. There are studies out there that tell you that they have linked sleep deprivation to the state of drunkenness. So if you are sleep deprived, you are literally operating like you have had too much to drink. So it's studies are out there. So it's something to think about, right? It's a good lesson that you've learned. Probably the hard way, I assume. It's okay. What else? What are some other lessons that you guys have learned? Anything else? Yeah. Don't procrastinate. How many of you have that one? Surely a lot of you. Okay, don't procrastinate. Yes, and that's probably had some very negative impacts, I'm sure. How about another one? One more lesson that you've learned. One more lesson. Something different. You guys are so quiet. One more lesson. Yes.
You gotta study for every class, even if you think it's easy.
So you can't just blow off the class if you think it's really easy. Okay, good one. So you guys gave me lessons that you've learned, right? So you reflected on that process of what you have learned over the course of the next 6 weeks, right? But what I want to know then, ultimately, is what you're going to do with that. And that's what it means to be reflective, is to really think, but then also take it to that next step and how you're going to process it, okay? So I'm sure you've all come up with the lessons that you've learned, and now you have an action plan for how you're going to address them moving forward, right? So even if it's an easy class, you're going to study. So you've learned that. Or if you've learned that you need sleep, you're going to go to bed early, right? So those are concrete things that you can do. And in engineering practice, as well as in your projects, it's really this idea that you're constantly reflecting, right? The purpose I propose in engineering design is understandable as a reflective conversation with the materials and the situation. So you guys should have, at this point, experienced the fact that you are constantly engaged in a reflective process with what you are working on. And that may mean through conversation with your community partner. It may mean through conversations with your team. It may mean through redesign of your projects, but those are all pieces of reflective practice, right? And that will make you a better professional if you constantly are thinking about what you've done, learning those lessons, and then taking them into account as you move forward into the next step of your projects, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? Okay. All right. Everyone does this as a professional. You should do this. And why do we do it? Well, we do it because you cannot possibly fully understand an experience until you take some time to sit and think about it, right? Oftentimes, they say when students go do a study abroad, for example, you have a great experience, you may have learned some really cool things in Australia, but it really isn't until you have perhaps really reflected upon that experience, even had a couple years pass, that you learn the real lessons of that study abroad experience. And maybe it's that, you didn't realize that there were marginalized communities in Australia, but now that you have had time to think about it, you've suddenly realized that, oh, I interacted with individuals that were marginalized in this society, and perhaps I can relate to them or I can't relate to them. So those are a reason we do this, is to really fully understand that experience and connect to it. And it's also used specifically in the classroom, especially in your EPICS experience, to connect what you're learning in class with that actual lived experience. So you guys are learning all about engineering. You're taking hydraulics, dynamics. What other class are you guys taking? What other classes? Nothing? That's all you're taking in those 2 classes? Oh, come on. What else? Come on, throw something out. What else are you taking? Anything? Just pepper them out. What are you taking? What classes? Yeah. Calculus. Okay, you're taking calculus. What else? What else? Physics. Other classes? What class? Linear circuits. Anybody take any policy classes? Yeah, any communication classes? Did you take a communication class? Yes, you all should be raising your hand now. You've all taken a communications class, right? Okay. English classes, you've taken these classes, right? So you're connecting those experiences and what you've learned in those classrooms to your design, right? There is nothing about this project you're doing that operates in isolation. You're not going to just be applying physics or calculus or linear circuits or communication, right? You have to bring them all together, and reflection will help you do that as you start moving through these projects, okay? So I also want to point out that we've done this in all of the series that you've been in. So if you have been in this entire community engagement series, we have been reflecting the entire time. How many of you were in that first session where we evaluated our personal biases and stereotypes, or positionality? A few of you. Can you kind of summarize what we did in that session for those that weren't there? Anybody? Can I give you a quick summary? 1 to 2 sentences. What did we do? There's a positionality and where you come from. And right, right. And so you had to reflect upon not only your own individual positionality and where you come from, but you also had to think about your community partner, right? So we did that in the first one. In the second one, we really did that evaluation piece, and we talked about project failures, right? The top 10 reasons that project fails. So those were very reflective in thinking about projects. And then the last one we talked about how to communicate. And so we reflected upon kind of communication breakdowns that we had and how we might address those moving forward, all right? So those are the ways in which you can reflect. Sorry. And there's a framework that I like to use for students and professionals as well to reflect that helps you really think about the process. Because it's not a Dear Diary. So you're supposed to write reflections in EPICS, and they should not read like, Dear Diary, I did this today, right? That doesn't mean anything. What we really want to know is the depth. So we do want you to describe, I call this the deal model. Describe what you did. So tell me what you did in this experience. Then I want you to examine it, so pull it apart, evaluate it a little bit. And then the last piece that I think we often forget is articulating our learning. So what do we learn from this? How are we going to apply it professionally? How are we going to apply it to that situation? Okay, so none of us showed up to meet with our community partner. I described the situation. I examined what happened in the process. And then I provide steps that I will take to never let that happen again, right? So how might I interact with my team? How might I interact with a community partner? So this is a really good framework that will get you thinking about how to write good reflections. And they're also incredibly useful in your professional space because you're going to graduate someday, right? And you are going to have to do a professional evaluation. Your boss is going to require it of you. And it may be a checkbox, but in most cases there'll be some written portion. So it's really nice to use a framework like this to describe your growth, to talk about, here's what I've done, here's why I think it's important, and here's what I'm going to do with it as I move forward. Okay, it's a really nice framework to kind of wrap your hands around. And there's a handout in front of you right now. Some of you will have to share. I think we're a little short today. That provides questions to help you answer those specific pieces, okay? So what I'd like you to do next is to, on that same piece of paper that you used or your phone, is to answer this question. Is our project on track to meet our original project goals for the semester? If not, how will this impact our project partner? And also, what can we do to get the project back on schedule? All right? So answer that question and think about using that framework that's in front of you. Describe what's going on, examine the process, and then articulate what you're learning from this. Okay, so that's kind of that last piece. What can we do to get the project back on schedule? So take a few minutes and answer this question. And I'm going to have a lot of you share out, so please take some time to be thoughtful in your response. And I believe this is one of your reflection questions that you actually can answer. So it's in your best interest to take some time and answer it now. Then you'll have one done. Okay, if you guys could share with the person next to you, I'm going to have 2 groups from each row share out what they've talked about.
All right. So, I go first. So,
was that I'm on the wolf team and we're making this interactive map for our community partner. And we found that our original goal at the beginning of the semester was to deliver a finished product. But now it's looking like that's not going to be possible at the end of the semester because of setbacks that we thought were minor in the beginning.
And we just kind of didn't really realize that we were also holding classes and everything going on at the same time. So we were just not having a ton of time.
And probably getting it back to
to accelerate it, we could probably get like more advice from experts in like Iowa.
Because we had some like new design considerations where prototyping and we're like this might not be enough space for that. So we had to make a few adjustments. But I think that we can be back on track if we just put in a few more hours outside the semester. But like if we weren't or if we don't finish on time, then the project partner will be able to like take the prototype and ask the kids how they feel about it. And so it'll take longer to like roll out an actual solution.
All right, so how many of you can raise your hand and say that our project is on track to meet its goals by the end of the semester? 1, 2. Okay, so about 50% of you. And how many of you said you're not on track to meet your goals? Okay, so a few more. Some of you just didn't vote. I don't know what that means, but all right. Okay. So, all right, let's have a group share out what they learned from all this. So how about you guys in the very back corner? What did you guys talk about? You can do one project or both your projects together. It doesn't matter.
So our project, we're delivering a museum exhibit, or parts of a museum
Okay.
exhibit, and we had a couple setbacks this semester. One, it got really cold,
Yep.
so we weren't able to meet then. And then the other 2 times after that, the ECN computer network was down, and half of our stuff is in SolidWorks. We couldn't access the license, but despite this, we focused on some crucial parts and had to drop
Okay.
some extra things.
Okay.
Which is why I said we're kind of somewhat not on track,
Mhm.
but the things that they expected to be delivered are
Okay, so you did a good job of describing, right, what's happening, what you're kind of doing to adjust. So what will you do with the lessons that you've learned from this experience?
So one, it's always a good idea to back things up. SolidWorks files, if we hadn't backed up somewhere, we might have been able to access them.
Right.
Also, it's a good idea in the beginning when you're sort of itemizing the things that you're going to do. It's a good idea to have things that are high priority that need to get done, and then things that are like,
Yeah.
if things go wrong, you're able to drop it.
Right, very good. So those are really good concrete lessons that are transferable to anything you're going to do, right? Not just this project. How about another group from the back? Anybody in the back row? Anybody can pick one of your groups? How about you guys in the back corner?
So my project is like approximately on track.
Okay.
For us as a priority. But some of the things that we've done to like try and stay on track is, if we have a problem coming up with like multiple solutions, and we can move forward with like one solution once our project partner gets back to us.
Mm-hmm. So, have other folks had issues with partners not communicating with them? Has anybody figured out a good way to get them to communicate with them if they're not responding? So how do you adjust if you're not hearing back from your partner? Anybody had to make adjustments? Yeah.
Well, not my team, but last semester, a different team on my group, they just switched to a completely different new project partner because they weren't getting any response.
Okay, so they dropped their partner. Okay. Assuming you have to stay with your partner, what else could you possibly do? What medium are you using now to connect with them?
Right now we're using email, and
Okay.
we've tried to schedule many Skype interviews, so eventually we're using Skype.
Okay, okay. Any other suggestions for how they might connect with their partners? Have you guys had success with international partners? Because it's a very tough challenge. Yeah.
Do you guys ever like plan on meeting your partners in person? Every May, so the Ireland Maymester, so we go there every May, but that's like one time over two. That's okay, because I know our project is in Bolivia, and like I've never had to like personally like contact the community, but like I know as soon as we went and we actually met the community and like our project partners, like our communication like the following semester like really improved, and I think we just kind of like set some guidelines like in person, like we really
Yeah.
want to be able to like contact you guys like once a week or like once a month, like whatever's doable, because it's like really important that like we can stay in contact with you. I think that's what we did. I think it worked
Yeah.
well. Like once we were like established that like kind of
Personal, it's a relationship. You've created a relationship. Yeah, so there's kind of those levels of communication that's, okay, here's basically emails and text messages. There's no real human interface. And then we start moving to phone calls where at least you hear a voice. And then we have the face-to-face where it now becomes really personal and there's relations. International calling, I don't know, might try and see if there's a way that you could call them. Surely EPICS can absorb a phone call for you. And that it would mean you'd have to stay up for an odd hour, but it still might be worth more. It's that next step in that personal kind of space. All right. What will you do? Let's have another group go. How about you guys in the second to last row? Who wants to go in the second to last row? Got to have two groups go. No one. You guys are so quiet. Never experienced this before in an EPIC session. How about you two guys back there? You were talking, I think.
At least for our project, we have two things going on. The first one's in front of schedule, so we're actually getting stuff done and delivered to them.
Good.
But then our other project is actually pretty far behind, so it's going into like the fourth semester or so.
Okay.
We're planning on it being like a one-year project.
Okay. So in terms of lessons learned, what will you do and how will you take those forward?
So the one that was behind, a lot of the issues we're having with it was because of communication with the partners. So they would
Okay.
give us some specifications, we build it to that, but then they later on change their mind about what they wanted. So trying to figure out exactly what they want and design it around that is what we're trying to focus on this semester to actually get something that they want
Okay.
specifically.
Okay. And how will you apply that then in the future?
At least
What
for-
what will you do differently to try and maybe get rid of some of those steps of that back and forth?
What we're doing now, we actually have like a software thing we're making for them, is just providing them like small like prototype versions they can try out and see what they like and what they don't like about it, and then just take aspects of the prototypes that actually work and then use them to build the final application.
Okay. And have you guys been meeting with them at all face to face?
Yeah, so they're Habitat for Humanity in Lafayette, so
Sure.
we're meeting with them like every week or two.
And do you meet with them while you're designing or after you've designed and having them evaluate?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Not doing as much while we're designing it currently, but when we actually have something to give to them, we'll
Yeah.
meet with them more often.
Okay. So in your case, it might make sense to try and meet with them a little more upfront to try and avoid some of those constant steps, which almost feels like what the definition of insanity if you keep doing the same thing knowing the same outcome's going to happen. So there's a way you could kind of get out ahead of that. All right. How about you guys over here? Share out where your project is and lessons you've learned. How about you guys?
All right. So my project was
Okay.
It's like American Sign Language.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a dictionary app on iOS that is like serves as a teaching tool for kids in the deaf school,
Okay.
ISD in
Indy.
Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
K through 6. Essentially, it's just a bunch of words categorized, and then
Okay.
a definition and a GIF of like a video of someone signing it.
Mm-hmm.
So we believe we're on track for the requirements that were given for us, but we set some kind of lofty goals in terms of like
Okay.
a full redesign of the app and everything like that. And what we think will, at least the first 9 weeks, we kind of had to tackle like how to work through the language that they were using to
Okay.
apply to previous semesters, because we're an all new team
Okay.
and no one's been on it
Mhm.
for previous semesters. And what we learned from that is just not to be afraid to reach out and ask for help.
Right.
So,
Okay.
for example, one of the people in the other groups, his roommate actually was on this team last semester.
Ah.
He coded, so
Nice.
it kind of worked out where he just kind of came in and showed us the ropes. And
Sure.
we improved.
Yeah. And that's a really great lesson that will be useful even when you get into your future professions, right? So if your your boss gives you a job and you don't understand something, and you spend the next 2 weeks still not understanding something, and the boss comes back to you and says, "Do you have the job done?" and you say, "No, I didn't understand it." Do you think the boss is going to be very happy with you? No, right? So they expect you to ask questions and to engage in that process. So that's a really good process that will utilize as you go moving forward. How about you guys in this middle row? Team that wants to share. Yeah.
So I think with Engineers Without Borders, like our overall project is like pretty
Mm-hmm.
on track, but I'm like specifically part of like we call it like the business development team, and we
Okay.
focus on like fundraising and marketing for like our project and stuff. And I don't even know if you could say that we're behind, because I don't think there was enough of a plan. It's the first semester we've done
Sure.
this like team, and I just feel like I didn't come in with enough of a plan, and I was expecting to be able to do that at the beginning of this semester and like really like talk through like what we wanted to do and like what we wanted like the team to like look like and like what we wanted to accomplish, but we immediately got thrown at with like two grants and like a bunch of other things that we needed to do, and it just like every time we tried to like step back and like plan, there was like something else we needed to
Right.
do, because we still had all the responsibilities of the structure that we had
Mhm.
previous semesters, but we needed to like kind of like fit it to this new team. So I think we haven't like missed anything, and we
Mhm.
haven't like dropped the ball on any of like our deliverables per se, but I think for the future and like next semester, like spending time to plan ahead of time and like really think about like what we want to do and like how we want it to look, because
Right.
it's kind of like a building semester, and just like learning from like what works and
Mhm.
what doesn't, and just like how and applying what we've done this semester to like the future
Yeah.
semesters.
Because there's always going to be deadlines, there's always going to be projects, there's always going to be grant funding, things like that are going to be thrown at you, right? And so really taking a pause and making sure you have that concrete plan so that when you do apply for those grants or when you do talk to your partner, you have something concrete and backed up by a solid outline of practice. That's a really good thing to do. Yeah. How about you guys? Somewhere here. You guys?
So I'm also on Engineers Without Borders.
Okay.
I'm on the technical team.
Okay.
So we're like designing the actual pipeline.
Okay.
So our original goals that we set for this semester, we haven't achieved all of them because we've been perpetually reassigning our goals as we figure out, since it's in Bolivia,
Yeah.
like we can't go out and gather
Right.
information all the time. We have to go on assessment trips every year. So we have limited data to work with. So we've
Mhm.
been